teach you how to make the auto lease, which is the first step in making a loaf of sourdough bread. So hopefully by now you've been feeding your yeast, and it should be quite bubbly. I don't know if you can see that at the light. Oh, there we go. All right, you can see it's all bubbly. You can smell it. It should smell a little sour. It smells a little off. That's all right. It's fermenting. That's what it should do. So what we're going to do tonight is, like I said, we're making the auto lease, which is basically just we're mixing the starter, which is the yeast, with some more flour and some water, and we're just going to gently mix that until the flour's mostly incorporated, and let that sit overnight and let it just rest and do its thing. So I'm going to tell you on the video what the measurements are in grams, and then I'm going to I'll post the recipe with the ingredients in cups just in case you get lost, but I am going to also post a math worksheet to go with it so you can try and figure out the conversions just in case you don't have a scale handy. So I'm gonna put my bowl on the scale and zero it out. First thing I need is 150 grams of my starter. So I'm just gonna weigh that into my bowl. Yeah, 384, come on, let's go, 90, getting closer, 125, and 150, exactly, getting good at this. All right, the next thing we need, I'm going to zero out my scale again. The next thing we need is 700 grams of flour. So much flour. I have a bucket here that is my flour bucket. This is the second bucket that I've gone through. It's already half empty. I've been making bread like crazy. So 700 grams. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm at just about 700. 700. All right. And the last thing we need tonight is 475 grams of water. I'm just filling my beaker here. So 475 grams of water. If you don't have a scale, I highly recommend one. Just because it makes it a little bit more precise, because you might have to do some rounding when you do the math to figure it out in cups and tablespoons like that. All right, so now I'm just going to mix this, and you can use your hands. Kind of fun to use your hands, because you just want to mix it so that it's barely incorporated. You want to get all the flour and as much of the liquid in as possible, but you don't want to overwork it, because we want the flour and the gluten in the flour to just relax. Because if we overwork it, the gluten will just tighten up and seize up, and then you'll have like a brick for a loaf of bread. So you just want to get it so that it's barely incorporated, and I'll show you. So it looks a little lumpy, looks a little rough, and then you will see what it looks like in the morning. I'm just gonna let this rest overnight. I'm going to cover it with a towel, put it to sleep, and say good night. And I will see you in the morning. Hi, good morning. So we're here ready to move on to step 2 in making our bread. I have our autolyse here that's been rising overnight. It's been resting. It's all nice and formed together. If you see, it's a little bit dry, it's a little bit wet, and it's still bubbly from the yeast that's been working on and eating the rest of this flour so that it could rise to become our beautiful loaf of bread. So what we're going to do now is add our salt to the bread. This is what's going to give it its the ultimate flavor. The salt also it stops the yeast from working. It kind of puts a limit on how much it'll rise. So it kind of like slows the process down, which is why we wanted to wait for it to rise first, and then we're gonna add the salt. So again, just like last night, I'm gonna give you the measurements in grams. I will include the more typical measurements in the recipe when I post it, but I will also include a math worksheet so that you can figure out these measurements on your own. So I'm going to zero out my scale here. I need 32 grams of salt. That seems like a lot. There we go. So 32 grams of salt. And then zero out my scale here. And the water that I use, the amount of water that I use, I've been kind of playing around with my recipe because my dough has been quite wet because I have a really active wet yeast right now. So I haven't been adding as much water as you might find on recipes online. Right now I added equal amounts of salt and water, and I'm stirring it a little bit. So I did 32, maybe 32 to 50 grams of water is good. I'm just stirring the salt a little bit, and I'm gonna pour it on my dough. Okay, you can see this. I have all this water in here, and I'm just going to squish the dough a little bit to mix the salt in so that I don't have like lumps of salt anywhere. I don't think I did a really good job mixing this last night. Okay, so now it's all mixed in, and I'm gonna begin the folding process. So I'm gonna fold my bread 6 times. Ultimately, with a 30-minute to an hour rest in between each fold. Now I'm doing this to replace the kneading process. The folding is a little bit more relaxed, and it's not going to overwork the gluten in the flour. The gluten in the flour is what holds everything together. It's the binding agent. And if you overwork the gluten in flour, when you're making anything, you're going to end up with things that are so wound. Think about it as winding a rubber band more and more and more. And the more you wind the rubber band, the tighter it gets. So we want to try and keep things loose. We don't want to make things super tight. So we're just going to fold. I'm going to see if I can show you this. So basically you lift and then you fold over, and then I'm going to turn, and I'm going to do this 4 times. Lift and fold, turn, lift and fold. One more, turn, lift and fold. So I end up with kind of a little ball here. I don't know if you can see that from the light. I'm going to cover this and let it sit here and rest for another 30 minutes. I'm gonna come back and fold it. Ultimately, I'm gonna fold this a total of 6 times before I move on to the next step. So what I recommend is look at the clock right now, write down the time, and write down first fold. Then plan out a schedule and write down the times in 30-minute to 60-minute increments of when you're going to come back and fold. And then when you get to your last fold, so your 6th fold, you're going to let it rest for another 30 to 60 minutes, and then I will catch you back here for part 3 of bread making. Alright, welcome back. We are going to move into step 4 of making our bread. So step 1 was the autolyse. Step 2 was to add the salt. Step 3 was the folding. So I didn't necessarily make a separate video for the folding, but I showed you how to do it in the step 2 salt part of the video. So hopefully you have folded your bread 6 times by now, and it is nice and rested. Your dough should have come together, I don't know if you can see that, a little bit more. So it's not quite so wet, a little bit more formed. Might still be a little bit sticky, and that's okay. What we're gonna do now, I'm just getting my flour, is we're going to form the bread now into our little sourdough round. So as you see, I put a ton of flour. You see that? I don't know if the glare. I put a ton of flour down onto my surface, my cutting board here, because my dough is still quite wet. And I'm just gonna pour it out onto my surface. You can slowly put your fingers around the edge of it if it sticks to your bowl. Now this is the fun part. So I'm just gonna sprinkle the top with some flour. Make sure my hands are nice and floury so that they don't stick. And now very gently, you wanna treat this like it is your precious baby. You've been taking care of this dough for like a day now. So we need to be very, very gentle with it. You don't want to stick your fingers in it. We don't want to pop it. If you see any bubbles, that's a good thing. Don't pop them, leave them there. So you're just going to take your hands and you're just going to kind of do one of these motions around the edge. And we're just going to gently tuck the edges under. I don't know if you can really see what I'm doing. And then I just kind of turn my dough around and I just keep working it around until I have a nice little ball here. And I'm being very gentle. I'm just kind of tucking the bottom in, and I want to create some surface tension on the top of my bread. You see I have some bubbles here, and that's all right. It's good. I'm gonna leave them there. I don't want to play around with it too much because, again, like I said earlier, we don't want to overwork that gluten. We want it to just be nice and gentle and rest for a little bit longer. So now that I have it formed into a ball, I will show you a little close-up here. I have it formed into a ball, and I'm just going to let this rest. I'm going to cover it again and let it rest for another half an hour to 30 minutes, and then I will show you the next step. All right, we're back. We're gonna move on to step 5, which is putting our bread baby to sleep in a proofing basket, so it can take another rest for a couple hours before we go ahead and bake it. Now, proofing basket I just use a bowl, and it's just, you need something about this size. A bowl, a colander would work. Basically what we're doing is we're going to reform our round and then place it into the basket so that the basket helps hold the shape of the bread into our nice little round. So it's kind of setting the gluten that we've been working into place. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to prepare my basket. I need a towel, a clean towel, and a bowl. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to spread some flour out onto my towel here. You want to use a lot, like more flour than you would think, but not, you know, too terribly much. So we just want to spread a thin layer or thickish layer of flour onto the towel so that the bread doesn't stick. And then I'm just going to put my towel into my bowl. And you know, there are things that you can find online, like special proof baskets, special bread towels, that kind of thing, which might make it easier or better. I don't know. I just use the materials that I have around the house, which is what I would expect you to do. I happen to have, like when we get to the cooking stage, I happen to have a cast iron Dutch oven, but I know that it will work in any pan. So again, the tools don't really matter. They just kind of make it nicer sometimes. So I have my proofing basket ready so that my bread can take a nice little nap in its bowl. I'm going to sprinkle the top of my bread with flour a little bit. And it's nice and puffy, so I want to make sure that I don't release any of that air that's in there right now. I want all that air in there because that's what's going to give it the light, airy texture. I'm going to gently roll my bread again to make the surface of the dough tight. Again, I'm just kind of pushing the ends under. And turn it around. So I have a nice little loaf here. Okay, now I'm gonna gently pick it up so it's upside down and place it in my basket. As you see, it fills up the basket quite a bit. This is gonna rise a little bit more. I'm just gonna cover this, and now we are going to wait about 3 hours, and I will see you back here when it is time to bake. All right, welcome back. We made it to the last and final stage, the baking stage. So I have my oven has been heating to 500 degrees. I'm just going to take my Dutch oven out of the oven right now. It's also been in the oven getting warm. This is very, very hot. So what I'm going to do now, my bread here has been resting in the basket. You can see it from the light. There we go. It's all nice and puffy and bubbly. And I'm going to just dump it directly into my pan here and hope and pray that the towel doesn't stick. I haven't had much luck with the towel not sticking lately. All right, let's see, fingers crossed. Oh, I got it over the pan a little bit. Perfect. All right, You can see it's all nice and bubbly. Now, what's really important is I'm going to cut some vent holes into the top of this because that will allow the steam to release and is what will give it that nice crunchy crust texture. So I'm just cutting some vent holes. I'm just going to do a cross. A little too much flour on the top of that, but that's okay. I'd rather have too much than not enough and have it stick. If it does stick, that's okay, don't panic. Just slowly try to peel the towel away from the top of the bread, being careful not to try to rip the top of your bread at all. Okay, now I'm gonna cover it and stick it in the oven. Squeezing it out a little bit. I don't know if you can see that. I'm gonna stick it back in the oven at 500 degrees for 20 minutes. Heavy. Okay, so into the oven, 500 degrees, 20 minutes. Then, after 20 minutes, I'm gonna turn the oven down to 450 and leave it in the oven for another 10 minutes. After that, then I can take my lid off and see what it looks like, okay? So I will meet you back when I'm taking my lid off, so I can show you what it looks like. But also, I guess I should mention right now that you're not going to take it out of the oven. So after you take the lid off, it's going to stay in the oven for another 15 minutes or so. I'll give you a quick shot of when I take the lid off. We'll put it back in the oven for another 15 minutes until it's nice and golden dark brown on the top, and then I will meet you back when it's done. All right, the timers went off and it is time to take the lid off of the bread. Let's see what it looks like. Let me see if I can get a good shot here. Whoa. I don't know if you can see that. Oh, it's huge. All right, back into the oven for another 15 minutes. All right, I'm back and it's time to take the bread out of the oven. Let's see what we have here. Oh, that looks so good. It's nice and golden brown. There we go. I close the oven back. All right, that looks perfect. So now I'm just gonna take this out of the pan and I am gonna let it sit for 30 minutes. It's super important, don't touch it for 30 minutes at least. I know it's gonna be really hard because it smells so good, but you gotta wait 30 minutes. And then enjoy. And I hope you had a great time learning how to make sourdough bread. And remember, if it doesn't work out this time, keep trying. It took me probably 5 times before I got a loaf that I actually wanted to eat. So if it doesn't work out this time, the good thing about this is you continue to feed your starter and you can try the next day. And eventually you'll be able to make a loaf of bread for your family every single day. Enjoy.